Shalom, peace and blessings. Welcome to the Fourth Angels Learning Center. My name is Jadiel, and today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be analyzing someone's video today. So this brother's name is Eli Israel. He's made it kind of his mission to kind of expose the New Testament, revealing falsehoods, claims that it's false, that Messiah is not truly the Messiah, Yahushua is not the Messiah, Paul is incorrect. Just the New Testament is a fabrication completely. So what the brother says is that the Old Testament, or what many people call the Old Testament, is proving incorrect the New Testament. So as many people know, what we do here is we show that what people call the Old Testament harmonizes with what people call the New Testament, letters and writings and things like that. Now, the New Testament is not the prophets and the writings of Moses. It is supporting, it is a commentary on it. It is something that is proven by the Torah and the prophets to be true, to be correct. So this is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to analyze his video. We're going to allow him to express his idea, but we're also going to analyze the same thought patterns. We're not going to go bring in other ideas until the end, because I definitely want to prove a point. He uses the New Testament to express his ideas as far as why certain things is incorrect and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down the line of all of his train of thinking and look at all the verses that he's utilizing and see if we can probably clarify some of the verses that he may be misunderstanding. Okay. So let's go to it. I'm going to share his video and we're going to be discussing it simultaneously. So I hope that it's not too long or anything along those lines. All right. So let me get his video up. His video is called "Why Did Messiah Sin?" Why did Messiah sin? Okay. All right. So he's utilizing the Septuagint in order to read the prophets, because he is correct in the authenticity as far as how old it is. It is the older manuscript of what people call the Old Testament, which is the Torah and the prophets. It is the oldest manuscript that we have. And so he's utilizing these things in order to prove his point, which I think is a great way of studying. When you're studying, you put all the manuscripts together that we possess, making sure that you keep everything in context. So we're going to listen to his explanation and breakdown, and we're going to see if it lines up with what the verses actually say. We are going to take a look at these verses after he explains them. Okay. So let's get started. Give me 1 second. Let me see, just make sure that I have the sound on. Right. All right, let's get started.
Verses 21 to 23, Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 21 to 23. As I mentioned in a previous episode, I choose to use the Septuagint because it is the oldest, most reliable Bible I could get my hands on. It was translated from Hebrew, the original Hebrew, into Greek by the Israelites back in the year 250 BC. And today it's available in English and as well in Greek.
So he's absolutely correct. It is the most reliable source of manuscript of the prophets. Not saying that other things can't be reliable. It's just it's the oldest manuscript that we have, is dated to a certain time period where even the Messiah, as well as certain disciples, use this particular manuscript in the New Testament, and there's definitely proof on that. So I definitely agree with him. It doesn't mean that you can't utilize the Masoretic as well as the Aramaic and things like that. It just means that this is the older manuscript that we have, and it seems to be more reliable as far as errors is concerned. More reliable don't mean without, but it definitely is more reliable. Let's continue to look at this.
Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 21 to 23. Thus says the Lord, take heed to your souls, and take up no burdens on the Sabbath day, and go not forth through the gates of Jerusalem. Verse 22. And carry forth no burdens out of your houses on the Sabbath day, and ye shall do no work. Sanctify the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. Verse 23. But they hearkened not, and inclined not their ear, but stiffened their neck more than their fathers did, so as not to hear me, and not to receive correction. So God said, do not take up a burden on the Sabbath day. Verse 22 again, and carry forth no burdens out of your houses on the Sabbath day, and ye shall do no work. Sanctify the Sabbath day as I commanded your fathers.
So if you notice, I want you to see what he's emphasizing. He's emphasizing on the fact that he says, carry forth no burdens on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath day. So that's his focus. That's his focus. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the same verses to see the meaning behind this requirement, or the context about this requirement. No burdens. And then Yah also reveals a purpose, and we're going to see a consistency of that in the other scriptures. But this is the focus that he's trying to relay. No burdens. Okay. Everybody who follows Eli Israel, I just want you to know I'm trying to be honest with what he's saying, so that way it won't be based off of any type of bias, but just analyzing the scripture honestly and analyzing what someone is saying honestly. And if I want to correct, I have to also understand correctly what he's trying to say. So he's focusing on the no burdens or loads on the Shabbat.
You're not supposed to do any manner of work on the Sabbath day. Verse 23, but they hearkened not, which means that
so the burden aspect is referring to acts, or an act of carrying something. This is how he's interpreting loads on the Shabbat, any manner of work. He's referring to just simply, you're not supposed to carry something. You're not supposed to carry stuff. This is what he's saying. You're not supposed to pick up and carry stuff. And he's thinking this is what Jeremiah is saying, but we're going to look at it a little bit closely. He's going to focus on the disobedience of Israel in regards to carrying a load, but he's not emphasizing on what was the context of carrying a load. Was it don't carry stuff, don't carry books, don't carry your Bible, don't carry your children? What is he's not giving a complete breakdown of the context of what Yah is actually asking for. So let's continue to allow him to express his idea. I just want you to see where he's coming from. Acts of carrying things is what he's saying Yah is saying not to do.
They rejected the commandments of God. They refused to keep the commandments of God and inclined not their ear. They had no interest in what God had to say on the subject, but stiffened their neck more than their fathers did, so as not to hear me and not to receive correction. So this is God's commandment. And if I can demonstrate that Jesus broke that commandment, then I would have proven that Jesus sinned. And after proving that Jesus sinned, I'm going to address why Jesus sinned. Because I imagine the first thing a person would think once they accept that Jesus sinned is he must have had a good reason for doing it. So why is very important. Let us turn to the Gospel of John chapter 5. John chapter 5, I will read verses 1 to 11, then verses 16 to 18, because that is where the points are. But feel free to read the entire chapter in order to make sure you get the full story. I'm reading from the King James Version of the New Testament. John chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Verse 2. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. Verse 3. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. Verse 4, for an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. 5, and a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? Verse 7. The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool, but while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Verse 8. Jesus says unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. Verse 9, and immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed and walked, and on the same day was the Sabbath. Now it's important to notice the reason it says that on the same day was the Sabbath is because there was that law that one was not supposed to carry a load on the Sabbath. Verse 10.
So the first aspect of steering the conversation is to make you think that the reason why they mention the Sabbath day is to show that he is about to break the Shabbat. So this is what he's trying to imply. The reason why they made mention that it's the Shabbat is because there's a law that you shouldn't carry any loads, and he's about to break the Shabbat. So they're saying that the New Testament confirms his transgression of the law.
And it makes it very clear. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. Now notice that these Jews were correct, because we just read in Jeremiah chapter 17 that it is not lawful to carry a burden on the Sabbath day.
So we're going to also cover the aspect of those Jews being correct in his ideas. And we're going to show a little bit more context of what Messiah was dealing with pertaining to those Jews in regards to the law. So let's continue.
Yet this man has just been told to do the very same thing by Jesus when he healed him. So verse 10 again, the Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, It is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. Verse 11, he answered them, He that made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed and walk. Now verse 16 says, And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. The punishment for breaking the Sabbath day was death. And this is the reason the Jews wanted to slay Jesus, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. Not only had he worked on the Sabbath day, but he commanded someone else to work, in direct contradiction to what we read in Jeremiah chapter 17 and what is written elsewhere in the Holy Scriptures. Verse 17, but Jesus answered.
So he made mention saying, not only did Messiah work, but he also commanded the man he healed to work on the Sabbath as well. And this is the verse that he's going to use in order to make a claim that Messiah worked and claimed that the Father was working on the Shabbat. We're going to get clarity on this as well.
Answered them, my Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Now notice, Jesus did not say, there's a good explanation for this. He did not deny that he worked on the Sabbath. In fact, he confirmed it. He said, my Father is working, and I am working, although it is the Sabbath day. Now, if sin is breaking God's law, and God's law says, do not work on the Sabbath day, and Jesus has been found to be working on the Sabbath day and encouraging someone to carry a load which they should not have been carrying on the Sabbath day, then Jesus indeed broke the law. Jesus indeed sinned. Now, verse 18 says this. Just so you can see, this is not my private interpretation. Verse 18 says, therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So notice, Jesus broke the Sabbath, and he did not pretend that he did not break the Sabbath, but he simply said, my Father is working today on the Sabbath. That's what hitherto mean, even at this point, and I work today, hitherto, at this point, on the Sabbath. And the Jews wanted to kill him even more, because he had broken the Sabbath. By breaking the Sabbath, he broke God's law, which means he was in transgression. He sinned. So the question now is, why did Jesus sin? And the answer is simple, whilst difficult to accept. Jesus sinned because the pagans who invented him wrote the New Testament to undermine God's law. The pagans who invented the Jesus character wrote the New Testament in an effort to undermine God's law, and they got that person of Jesus, whom they invented, to break God's law and to admit that he broke God's law, and to even accuse God of breaking his own law by saying, my Father is working and I'm also working on the Sabbath day.
So he's claiming that that he's saying that Messiah, that the people that made it wanted to admit it. They made up the New Testament and they wanted to admit that Messiah was breaking the law, as well as claims that the Father was breaking his own law as well.
And because Jesus himself sinned, according to Christian doctrine, he could not have qualified to die for anybody else's sin. So the children of Israel need to wake up to the fact that we have been deceived. Jesus never existed, and it's time for us to return to the Father. With that, I say shalom.
All right. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start in the beginning of his argument by looking at Jeremiah 17, verse 21 to 23, and we're going to actually pull out the context of what it means by no loads. What the brother was saying was that it simply means don't carry stuff, and that is not what it's saying. Don't carry stuff. Messiah told somebody to carry something, therefore he told them to break the law. See, this type of thinking is not an honesty. You're not being honest with the scriptures. Not sure if he keeps the Shabbat, not sure if he carries stuff, not sure if he carries his children or carries any loads, right? Carry food. You want to carry food to a fellowship? I'm not sure if he doesn't carry things at all on this day, which he probably shouldn't, if this is the claims that he's saying the Shabbat requires. So let's look at Jeremiah 17 to see what's the context in these loads and see if there's any consistency anywhere else. All right, so let's pull up the scriptures. All right, so here we are, Jeremiah 17. We're going to start here at verse 21. Let's look at what it says. I'm reading from the King James, which is kind of similar to the Brenton. There's no deviation from what we're going to be talking about. I do use the Brenton as well. It's right here. So it says, "Thus saith Yahuwah, take heed to yourselves and bear no burden on the Shabbat. Bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem." So don't bear no burdens on the Shabbat, and don't bear no burdens into the city of Jerusalem. It says, "Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Shabbat." And then it says, "Neither do any work." Now, this is not talking about acts or actions. Don't do any carrying. He's literally saying, don't do any work, servile work, work that requires you to carry in sheaves, as was mentioned, to carry in things into the city. Now, watch this. It says, "But they did not obey, neither did they incline their ear, but their necks was stiff, that they might not hear nor receive instruction." Verse 24. "And it came to pass, if you diligently hearken unto me, saith Yahuwah, to bring in no burden through the gates of the city on the Shabbat, but hallow the Shabbat, to do no work therein. Then shall there enter into the gates of the city kings and princes sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and horses, their princes, the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall remain forever." So if you notice the correlation between the burdens and the work, burdens, work. Don't bring no burdens, don't do no work. So this is very important for us to understand. Is he saying don't carry stuff? Carrying things is work? Or is he saying do not carry things for the purpose of working? Now we're going to see clearly what that work was. Let's continue to read this. It says in verse 26, "And they shall come from the cities of Judah and from the place of Jerusalem, from the land of Benjamin, from the plain, from the mountains, from the south, bringing burnt offerings, sacrifices, meat offerings, and incense, bringing sacrifices of praise unto the house of Yahuwah." It says, "But if you hearken not unto me to hallow my Shabbat," right, "and to not bear a burden, nor entering into the gates of Jerusalem on a Shabbat day, then will I kindle a fire in the gates, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched." This actually occurred because of their desecration of the Shabbat, as well as the other commandments of Yah. Jerusalem was burnt down by Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah was the priest, the preacher and the priest at that time that was rebuking Israel for their working on the Shabbat. Now, in the book of Nehemiah, they were restored back to Jerusalem, and then Nehemiah started to mention what occurred at this time, what led them into captivity, and he mentioned it using the term burdens, and he expressed what they were doing with those burdens. So let's go take a look at that. Nehemiah, we're going to look at Nehemiah chapter 13, and if we go down to, let's say, let's start from verse 15. Okay, so look at what it says here. "In those days, I saw Judah, and people were treading the winepress on Shabbat, bringing in sheaves, lading donkeys, also wine, grapes, figs, and all manner of burdens. So now we're getting a little bit of context of what he's referring to as burdens, according to Jeremiah, that they're bringing in all these crops and products and things like that into Jerusalem. Look at what it says, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Shabbat, and I testified against them in that day wherein they sold victuals. So they were carrying these things in order to sell and make money. They were working. They were working, laboring. This is servile work. This is not just simply carrying something. They were not carrying something home. They were not carrying to disperse amongst those who was needing. They were carrying it in order for the context to work. And this is what Jeremiah was saying. They were bearing burdens to work. He said, don't bear no burdens and don't do no work. So here's very clear. Let's continue to read Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 16. Now there dwelt men of Tyre also that brought, I'm sorry. Let me go back down there. Verse 16. There were men of Tyre which brought fish and all manner of ware and sold on the Shabbat to the children of Judah in Jerusalem. So they're bringing in now burdens into the city to sell. This is the context of the burden. Listen to what Nehemiah said. Okay, guys? Verse 17, we're going to read verse 17 down. He says, then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do and profane the Shabbat? And then he brings up the time of Jeremiah. Did not your fathers do this? And did not our Elohim bring all this destruction upon us and upon this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Shabbat? So this is what he was doing. They were doing the same things that their fathers did in Jeremiah by bringing in loads of burdens in order for the purpose of selling, not carrying things home, not bringing their family home. They were carrying in for the purpose of working. It came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark, that before the Shabbat, I commanded that the gates should be shut and charged that they should not open till after Shabbat. And some of my servants set I at the gates that there should no burden be brought in on Shabbat. So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. So again, he closed the gates so no burdens could be brought in by these merchants. Remember, we saw that the people of Tyre was also bringing in burdens to sell it to the children of Israel on a Shabbat. So he said, let's close the gates so the merchants and sellers can't come in and bring those burdens in, which is basically products to sell to the children of Israel. This is the whole context about burdens. Okay? This is the context of what burdens mean. He did not want them to bring in burdens to enable them to sell and buy on Shabbat. Jeremiah, this is what Jeremiah was talking about, where he said, neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on Shabbat, neither do any work. He was correlating the burdens that they bought and sold with servile work and making money on Shabbat, doing business. Let's just say it like that. Doing business on Shabbat was prohibited. This is what Jeremiah did. Nehemiah broke it down clearly. This is what they were doing during the time of Jeremiah, during the time of Nehemiah, and he made reference to what their fathers did during the time of Jeremiah. So this is very clear what they were doing. So let's go to John chapter 5 to see if this is what was going on in John chapter 5. Is this what was going on in John chapter 5? Let's read verse 1 to 11 as brother did, so we can get more context. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Yahushua went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Beth Chesed, having 5 porches. This is the Hebrew tongue Bet Chesed, which means house of mercy. It says, in these lay a multitude of impotent folk, blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. So this is about to be, someone is getting healed today. This is what they believe the waters will do. They believe that an angel will come down at a certain time into the pool and trouble the water. Whosoever then first walks into the water while it's troubled was made whole from their disease. Okay? A certain man was there, and he had an infirmity for 38 years. Yahushua saw him lying there and knew how long he had been in this state. And he asked him, do you want to be whole? The impotent man said to him, thinking that he's talking about the pool, he said to him, sir, no man, I have nobody here when the water is troubled to help me go into the pool. But while I am going to the pool, someone else steps in front of me and always gets in before me. So Yahushua said to him, rise, take up your bed and walk. And this is what they're saying. He's telling him to work. They said he's telling him to work, when we clearly saw that the context of work and bearing the burdens was to buy or sell. He is telling him to pick up his bed and take it home, to walk, to go, to demonstrate your wholeness. Immediately the man was made whole, took up his bed and walked. On this same day was the Shabbat. So the reason why they're bringing up the fact that it's Shabbat is to show what the Jews would start to complain about. Now, we're going to keep on going and until we finish all the verses that he utilized. It says, the Jews therefore said to him that was cured, it is the Shabbat. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. Now, what scripture says it's not lawful to carry a mat, sleeping bag, whatever small type of blanket, whatever it is? What scripture, Torah, prophet says it's not good to carry your bed on the Shabbat? But in actuality, it says not to carry any burdens in order to sell or buy on Shabbat. But he's saying that this is correlating with what it says in Jeremiah, and it's clearly not. The context in Jeremiah as well as Nehemiah is referring to buying and selling and doing business. This is not business. Let's continue. It says, he answered and said, he that made me whole, the same said to me, take up and walk. Okay, so now I'm not sure if I want to skip these verses. Let's read through these verses so that way we can get the context all the way to verse 16 to 18, which is what brother Eli Israel read. So it says, then they asked him, what man was this that said this to you, take up your bed and walk? He that was healed did not know who it was, because Yahushua had conveyed himself away, and the multitude being in that place, meaning that they surrounded him. He couldn't see, he couldn't decipher who it was. After Yahushua found him in the temple and said to him, behold, you are made whole. Go and sin no more, lest a worse thing happen to you. The man departed, verse 15, and told the Jews that it was Yahushua which had made him whole. Now, this is where he started reading from. Therefore did the Jews persecute Yahushua and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on Shabbat. What did Messiah do on Shabbat? Messiah worked a certain type of work on Shabbat. And we're going to see if that work is prohibited to be done, because he healed the man on Shabbat. It says here, Yahushua said, my Father works and therefore I work. My Father works and therefore I work. What was the works that his Father was doing? Because he says he was claiming that the Father was breaking Shabbat. He didn't claim the Father was breaking Shabbat. He claimed that the Father was working. What business was the Father doing? What business was Messiah doing? Healing, right? In John chapter 14, Messiah makes clear what these statements of work is all about, right? When Philip asked, show me the Father in John 14, verse 9, in verse 10, it says, do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I speak to you, I do not speak of myself, but the Father dwells in me. He does the works. He does the works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake. Verily I say to you that he that believes on me, the works that I do shall he do also. Is he talking about business? Or is he talking about preaching, teaching, and healing? Which one is he talking about? And which one is prohibited on Shabbat? Is healing prohibited? Is teaching prohibited? The context is very clear. When he says my father's working and I'm working, he's not talking about doing business or carrying mats. He's talking about healing, and he's talking about teaching, and he's talking about making people whole. This is what he's talking about in the context. If you don't believe that this is true, at least be honest with what it's saying. If you want to disprove something, make sure that the context of what you're trying to disprove is clearly incorrect, rather than being misrepresented. So if you can't clearly identify the context in something that's false, like the book of John, how can you correctly dissect or rightly divide something that's written in Jeremiah? Because we clearly saw that the Jeremiah verses was not correct. Now, one thing that he said, very important, he said that the Jews was correct, telling him that he was breaking the Shabbat. Let's see, what was Messiah's issue with the Jews? Well, first in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, he says, I think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets, meaning including Jeremiah. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say to you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot and one tittle in no way shall pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever shall break one of these laws, commandments, and teach men, he shall be the least in the kingdom of heaven. And whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And then he says, he compares the breaking of the commandments and the teaching of breaking the commandments to what the scribes and Pharisees were doing. He says, except your righteousness exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will in no way enter into the kingdom of heaven. Why would he say do a comparison with the scribes and Pharisees after he said, whosoever shall do and teach them the same, whosoever shall break one of these commandments and teach men to do so shall be called the least in the kingdom. Now, was this what the Pharisees was doing? Were they teaching men to break the commandments, or were they upholding the Shabbat as well as everything else, as Eli Israel said? Well, let's look at a few conversations that he was having. Matthew chapter 15. It says, then came Yahushua, the scribes and the Pharisees, which were in Jerusalem, saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? Because they wash not their hands when they eat bread. So now we're going to look at what they were teaching the people as far as not carrying mats on Shabbat. The transgress, they used the term transgress in regards to the tradition of the elders. So what does Messiah say in response? Why do you transgress the commandment of Yah by your tradition? Why is this an issue? What you mean they're transgressing the commandments of Yah? Aren't they correct pointing out that Messiah was transgressing the law? Why wouldn't Messiah now be pointing out that they are transgressing the law? Let's continue to see. It says, for Elohim commanded, saying, honor your mother and father. Now he's quoting Torah. He's quoting from Moses. Honor your mother and father, and he that curses mother and father, which is in Leviticus, let him die the death. Right? Verse 5, but you say, whosoever shall say to his father or mother, it is an offering by whatsoever you might be profited by me, and honor not his mother and father, he shall be free. Thus have you made the commandment of Elohim of none effect by your tradition. This was a tradition of the elders during this time where they can give an offering to their parent and pay their way not to actually take care of their mother and father in their old age, that they can pay them money to be free from the burden of responsibility. Now, Messiah says you can't pay to get out of a commandment from Yah. You hypocrites, as Isaiah the prophet says, you shall say, this people draw near me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, but in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. So if they're teaching, let's highlight that. If they're teaching the doctrines of men, the commandments of men, who commanded them not to carry a mat or the bed on the Shabbat? It is the Pharisees and scribes, no one else. Yah has not commanded that. Carrying a load is not exclusive to carrying stuff. Don't carry your bed. Don't carry a chair. Don't carry your child. No, it's very specific. Do not carry things for the purpose of business. Do not carry things for the selfish purpose on Shabbat. Do not do things outside of the realm of what Yah asks you to do on Shabbat. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, so I think this is very clear so far. I want to recap real quick just for everybody. I wanted to just make it known. We allowed the video to express his ideas, and then we followed that train of thinking by going to the verses that the person was using. We saw that Jeremiah was not talking about just carrying stuff, but carrying things for the purpose of business, working. The working aspect was referring to business. This is why it says no servile work, no buying, no selling, no carrying burdens in the city to sell, no carrying things out of your house to sell. This is what was talked about in the book of Jeremiah. We showed the consistent idea that is presented, that I'm talking about, in the book of Nehemiah, which said clearly that what they were doing was buying or selling victuals, bringing in stuff to sell and buy into the cities of Jerusalem. And then Nehemiah rebuked them, saying, you are doing the same things that our fathers did that brought destruction to Jerusalem. He was referring to what Jeremiah was saying in Jeremiah 17. But he made it very clear what they were carrying, what burdens they were bringing in, which was business, burdens of business, carrying victuals, selling, buying, merchants and sellers coming from Tyre, buying or selling with them, trading, whatever it is. So we also went to John chapter 5, and we read through basically the whole chapter, 1 to 18, and we showed that him telling them to carry his mat was not him telling him to work or to do business. It did not have any connection with Jeremiah 17, nor did it have any connection with Nehemiah 13. Now, him saying that he is his father works and therefore his work, we showed very clearly in correlation to the context, as well as other areas such as John chapter 14, showing that the work that he's talking about is the works of healing, the works of teaching, the works of preaching. This is the works of the Father that the Son does. Now he says, I don't speak of myself. I do what the Father says, and what the works that you see is from my Father. So what he's saying is everything that he was doing, the Father is the one commanding him to do it. So when he says the Father works, therefore our work, is whatever work the Father wants to be done, that's what I'm going to do. And that work is not business. It is the works of healing, preaching, and teaching. This is what work him and his Father was doing on the Shabbat. Now, he made a reference during the reading of John chapter 5, saying that the Jews were correct in telling him that he was breaking the Shabbat, when the actual opposite was the issue. He constantly had an issue with the scribes and Pharisees removing Yah's commandments in order to promote the traditions of the elders. We saw this in Matthew chapter 15. So the idea that Messiah was breaking the Shabbat and then they wanted to admit it is not being honest. If you don't believe in the New Testament, then be honest with the text and show and prove the errors of the text. But if you can't rightly divide something that's wrong, how can you rightly divide something that's correct? You can't even clearly see what's wrong in the New Testament. How can I think that you can see what's right in the prophets and in the Torah? So I hope that this was clear. Everybody that follows Eli Israel, be very careful what is being said. There's a lot of steering and there's a lot of rambling on as far as things that has nothing to do with this. Like in the beginning with what is sin and transgression of the, there was a lot of side statements about the pagans, people making this in order. No need for that. Just like I don't want to say what he is. I don't have any thought. All I know is that he's wrong. Brother Eli Israel is wrong, in particularly in saying that Messiah sinned. He is wrong in his analysis of Jeremiah 17 as well as John chapter 5. He is wrong. So I hope that you guys can clearly see that. And if there's any questions of Brother Eli, if you see this and you have any referencing, if you want me to address any other aspects that will promote your idea pertaining to this or something else, please feel free to send us the email. Or if anybody who follows Eli Israel have anything, wants to show anything that he may have said that may have convinced you that the New Testament is false, because this clearly is not an explanation. And if this is the types of explanation that is made that people agree with and they move away from the New Testament, then I'm not sure if I could be confident that you did it correctly, that you rightly divided things correctly. So if there's anything that I may be seeing incorrectly pertaining to this, or is there any other subject that Eli Israel have taught that you would like me to analyze and to allow him to break his point down and then follow behind him, I definitely will. So I hope that you guys have a blessed day and that you was blessed by this study. Continue to study the scriptures. Blessings. Shalom, shalom. Thank you guys for joining our study today. I hope that it was edifying. And if you want to support this ministry, you can support us on 4alc.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube page. Click the like button and the notification bell. I hope to see you guys on the next study. Shalom, guys.